What if the man who was supposed to love you on the most special night of your life looked you in the eye and told you it was all a lie? Marta believed she had lived a fairy tale, a perfect wedding, a billionaire husband, a promise of eternal love. But on her wedding night, instead of affection, she received rejection. Instead of oaths, she heard words as sharp as blades. That ring on her finger wasn't a symbol of love. It was the last link in a carefully planned revenge. But what Mark didn't know was that the biggest twist was yet to come, because fate, cruel and unpredictable, placed a life in the womb of the woman he thought he had used and discarded. And when hatred begins to crumble and love threatens to emerge from the ashes, the question changes. Is it possible to love someone after destroying them? You will now discover the truth behind a marriage tainted by hurt, but marked by a secret that changes everything. A story of pain, passion, redemption, and the real chance of a fresh start. But beware, what you're about to hear could change the way you see forgiveness. Are you ready to know how far someone can go for revenge? And how far can they go for love? The hall was drenched in golden light, chandeliers hung from the ceiling like constellations, and the guests moved in a silent ballet of calculated smiles and clinking glasses. Marta felt discomfort creep up her spine as she discreetly adjusted her teal dress, which looked more like armor than a piece of haute couture. She walked among strangers, trying to look calm, but her mind was racing with the memory of the invitation that had arrived with her name on it, an invitation that somehow seemed trapped. Leaning against one of the marble columns, she spotted a tall man in a perfectly tailored dark suit, watching the movement as if he didn't belong there. There was something about him that stood out, not because of his appearance, but because of the concentrated silence in his eyes. When their gazes met, he approached with studied calm. "You look uncomfortable here," he said, his voice low and firm. Marta blinked in surprise. "And you seem to know too much for a stranger." He arched an eyebrow. "Mark." She hesitated for a moment. "Marta." For long seconds, only the muffled sound of the orchestra filled the space between them. The magnetism was disconcerting. There was something about the way he stared at her, as if he already knew her, as if he knew more than he should. "What brings you here?" she asked, trying to regain control. "Curiosity," he replied, and then added with an enigmatic smile, "and opportunities." That night, when she returned home, Marta still felt his presence clinging to her skin. Mark had left a mark, and she couldn't imagine why. 2 days later, Mark showed up at her family home. The atmosphere was tense, her father barely concealing his despair at his failing business. Marta watched from afar until the library door opened and he walked in, like someone who had always belonged there. "I need to talk to you. Alone," he said, looking directly at her. Inside the room, silence reigned. He was only a few steps away, but his presence was overwhelming. Marta crossed her arms, trying to look firm. "What do you want from me?" "You, as my wife." She let out a nervous laugh. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No, I'm proposing a deal. Your name, my protection. Your yes, your family's future guaranteed." Marta felt the ground move beneath her feet. "You talk as if you already knew I'd say yes." He tilted his head slightly. "Because I do. You love your family, and you know they need me. What about love?" he whispered, not knowing why he still insisted on that word. Mark didn't answer. He just looked at her as if to say, that was never part of the plan. The cathedral was adorned with white flowers and linen curtains, the stained glass windows softly tinting the faces of the guests. Marta, clad in a delicate lace dress and translucent veil, felt herself floating between nervousness and hope. The sound of the organ filled the room as she walked down the aisle, her gaze fixed on Mark. He looked impeccable. His tailored suit outlined his haughty posture, and his steady gaze showed no trace of hesitation. When Marta reached him, her fingers intertwined with his, and a wave of warmth ran down her spine. He smiled. or at least showed his teeth. And for a moment, she believed it. Perhaps behind that coldness, there was something genuine. The vows were exchanged with rehearsed perfection. His words, low and paused, seemed to carry deep feelings. When the kiss was sealed, applause erupted from the pews, and Marta allowed herself to smile, convinced that she was safe. That this man, so reserved, was only hiding his love under layers of silence. Later, in the bridal suite, everything seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Rose petals on the bed, low lighting, the scent of vanilla in the air. Marta was nervous, but happy. She had put everything on the line for that moment. She waited a few minutes alone until the door opened and Mark walked in. He looked different. There was something about the way he closed the door, the way he kept his hands in his pockets and didn't look directly at her. "Are you all right?" she asked, trying to keep it light. Mark walked to the center of the room and stopped. "Take off that dress." Marta blinked, surprised at the coldness. "Are you nervous?" He slowly removed his jacket and threw it on the armchair. "This was never about love, Marta, and you'd better understand that now." She took a step back. "What are you saying?" Mark sighed, loosening his tie. "This marriage, it's not real. It's an agreement, an alliance of convenience, for me, and a trap for you." Marta felt her world spinning. "Are you kidding me? Your father destroyed my family. What you've lived through so far has been part of something bigger, something you never understood." The words cut deeper than any knife. She pressed her hands against her chest. "So it was all a lie?" "It was necessary," he replied without raising his voice. "And now, you're where you should be, paying off the debt you inherited." She couldn't answer. She just felt the air disappear from her lungs. The wedding dress, once a symbol of hope, was now a ridiculous burden. And Mark, her husband, was nothing more than an executioner dressed as a prince. The morning light came in timidly through the windows of the mansion. Marta was still wearing her wedding dress, now crumpled, dirty and dull, as if it reflected what she felt inside. She was sitting on the sofa in the library, her hands shaking a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Mark appeared in the doorway, his face as impassive as the night before. She didn't look at him. The silence between them was thick, about to explode. "I need you to understand," he finally said without coming any closer. "Understand what?" Her voice came out low, full of disbelief. "That I've been used?" Mark took a deep breath, like someone about to dive into murky waters. "My father was an honest man, a hard worker. Your father destroyed him. Lies, manipulation, fraud. He ruined our family without blinking an eye." Marta stared at him, her eyes red. "This has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you. You bear his name, and that's why I chose you." She stood up slowly, as if each word was a blow. "My father never told me any of this. Of course he didn't. He got rid of the guilt with toasts and smiles, but I lived through the end. I saw my mother fall apart. I found my father on the floor of our house, lifeless." Marta put her hand to her mouth. "No, it can't be true." Mark took a step forward, his eyes filled with anger and pain. He threw himself off the balcony after he lost everything, after his father had taken every penny, every business, every crumb of dignity. She stumbled back. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I didn't need your compassion. I needed you to believe in me, to fall in love, and then taste disappointment, just like my mother did." The silence returned, but now it weighed between two painful truths. Mark's and that of Marta, who had no idea of the shadow hanging over her surname. That night, Marta spent hours in front of the mirror. She thought of the empty promises, of Mark's hands on hers at the altar, of the sweet words that now sounded poisonous. She didn't cry. She only heard the sound of her own heart cracking. The next day, when she bumped into Mark in the hallway, she lifted her chin. "Congratulations, you've done it. You've shattered every illusion I had." "That was the point," he replied impassive. "But if you think it's going to destroy me, you'll have to try harder." Mark didn't reply. And perhaps, for the first time, he didn't know what to say either, because in Marta's eyes he no longer saw pain. He saw something new, something he hadn't planned on: strength. The next few days passed slowly and silently. The mansion, with its wide corridors and spotless rooms, seemed more like a mausoleum than a home. Marta moved like a shadow, avoiding Mark, holding her head high, even though inside she was still in ruins. At breakfast, they sat at opposite ends of the long table, a chasm between them. No words were spoken. Only the clink of spoons against cups filled the void. One afternoon, while Marta was reading in the library, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't have to look up to know it was him. "Do you need something?" she asked, without turning away from her book. "No," Mark replied. He stood there for a moment as if waiting for something more. Then he turned and left. That evening, Marta went out for a walk in the garden. The breeze was cold, but she preferred the discomfort of the wind to the stifling silence of the house. As she passed the flower beds, she stopped. Those lilies. They were the same ones her mother used to grow, the same ones she had casually mentioned weeks before the wedding. The next day, she noticed that the stained glass windows in the main hall had been restored. They had previously been cracked, but now they let the morning light in golden beams. No official mentioned orders. No one said anything. Mark began to appear more. He didn't speak, he just appeared. In the kitchen, in the garden, in the corridors, as if, for some reason, he couldn't help bumping into her. One evening, Marta was walking up the stairs when she heard his voice. "It's colder today." She stopped. "What?" "The night," said Mark from downstairs. "It's colder than yesterday." She went down one step, just one. "I prefer it like this." He remained silent. Then he went up a step. They were one step apart, but it looked like a chasm. "I didn't have the lilies planted for you," he said. "It was a coincidence." "Of course," replied Marta, expressionless. "And the stained glass windows, it was because they were ugly, that's all." She stared at him for a few seconds. "Are you afraid to admit when you care?" Mark clenched his fists. "This isn't about—" "What? Hatred? Revenge? Pain?" She went down another step. "You keep me here as punishment, but you seem more trapped than I am." He looked away. He didn't answer. That night, as she closed the bedroom door, she heard footsteps outside. She didn't knock, she didn't go in. He just stood there for a few seconds. And then he was gone. Marta leaned her forehead against the wood, eyes closed. Something was changing. But she didn't know if this was the beginning of redemption or another trap. The atmosphere in the house was dense, but charged with a different kind of tension, no longer just pain, but something more unstable, like gunpowder about to be ignited. Marta felt Mark's every step in the corridors, every veiled glance he cast her when he thought she didn't notice. One grey afternoon, they met in the library. She was reading by the window, and he entered without announcing his presence. He stopped in front of the fireplace, pretending to look at the old paintings. Marta looked up, aware of his presence. "Are you going to stand there and watch me, or do you intend to say something?" she teased, without closing the book. Mark turned around slowly. "Do you still see me as a monster?" She closed the book calmly. "Do you want me to say no? I want to know what you see when you look at me now." Marta stood up, her eyes fixed on him. "I see someone lost. Someone who hides behind their pain because they're afraid to feel anything else." Mark moved closer. Every step made the ground creak beneath his feet. "What about you? What do you feel now? Fear? Anger? Tired?" She crossed her arms. "But also curiosity, because I don't understand why you're still here, trying to provoke me." He stopped an inch away. "I'm not trying to provoke you. I'm trying to understand what's left of me." Silence exploded between them like muffled thunder. Marta's eyes shone with something undefined. Mark hesitantly raised his hand and brushed his fingers against hers. "Don't touch me if you're going to hide afterwards," she whispered. "I can't not touch you," he replied. And then everything collapsed. The kiss came abruptly, as if the whole world depended on that instant. It wasn't sweet, it was furious, full of resentment and desire. Marta pushed him away at first, but then tugged hard on his shirt, as if she too wanted to rip all the lies out of him. It was an intense few seconds, suffocated by everything they had been holding in for weeks. When they separated, they were both panting. "It doesn't change anything," she said, her voice shaking. "I know," Mark replied, but he couldn't look away. The next morning, Marta woke up before the sun rose. She sat on the edge of her bed, her heart squeezing. She knew what she needed to do. She knew it was all a cycle, and she didn't want to spin in it anymore. She went downstairs in silence and began to gather a few things: a bag, documents, a coat. Hours later, Mark found her sitting on the bench in the garden. "Going somewhere?" She stood up. "I'm going," he frowned. "Are you running away?" "I'm freeing myself," she replied firmly. "I'm not going to take part in your theatre anymore. I no longer want to live between gestures of affection and words of punishment. Marta, I believed in you, and then I believed you could change. But now, I only believe in myself." She walked past him. There was no anger, only decision. And Mark, for the first time, didn't have the strength to stop her. The room was empty, the bed made, the closet ajar, the empty hangers denouncing her absence. Mark walked through the rooms with hurried steps, as if reality could be contradicted by some forgotten detail. But all he found was silence, the kind of silence that sets in when something irremediable happens. He ran through the corridors, down the stairs, across the main hall. He called her name, once, twice, but all he heard was the echo of his own voice. As he opened the main door, the cold breeze hit him like a slap. Outside, no movement, no sign. Marta had gone, and this time there was no turning back. Mark went back inside, closed the door tightly and leaned against the wood as if it were the only thing keeping him from collapsing. The air seemed thin. The mansion, once too big for two, now felt like a tomb. He sat on the floor, his hands over his face. Why had she left? Because she finally realized that he had nothing to offer but pain. In the days that followed, Mark sank into a bitter stupor. He tried to maintain the routine, tried to ignore the empty space at the dining table, the absent sound of her footsteps upstairs. But nothing filled it. Nothing could replace it. He began to scour the places where she might have gone, hired people, looked for clues, questioned himself. It wasn't until weeks later that he found one solid piece of information: a small village far away, too simple by Marta's standards. But that's where she was. When he arrived, the smell of wet earth and burning wood enveloped him. He walked to the house indicated, hesitated in front of the gate, and then he saw her. Marta was sitting on a bench under a tree, her hair messily tied up, her skin flushed, her gaze lost in an open book on her lap. But that wasn't what paralyzed Mark. It was the gentle curve of her belly, the hand resting protectively, unconsciously, on her belly. Marta was pregnant. He couldn't move. He just watched, the world slowing down around him. Every beat of his heart sounded like a deafening drum. When she finally saw him, her eyes went wide. She stood up suddenly, her expression of shock quickly replaced by coldness. "What are you doing here?" Mark took a step forward. "You're—" His voice faltered. "Are you my son?" She didn't answer. She just crossed her arms, defensive. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you didn't deserve to know," she said firmly. "I left to save what little I had left, and I won't let you destroy that either." He took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "Marta, please. Go away, Mark. He hesitated. "I didn't know I could lose you, but now I know what it means." She turned her face away. Too late, and the gate closed between them like a verdict. The image of Marta with her hand on her belly never left Mark's mind. Time seemed to run at an uneven pace. The days became long and heavy. He returned to the village several times, always keeping his distance. He watched her from afar, searching for the courage he lacked to face the abyss he himself had created, until, one rainy morning, he made up his mind. He wouldn't wait any longer. He walked up to the door of the simple house where she was staying and knocked firmly. Marta opened it with a surprised expression, but didn't back down. She was stronger, more determined. "What do you want now? To talk? That's all? We have nothing to talk about." "Yes, you do," he said, taking a step forward. "I destroyed you, I know that, but I also destroyed myself with you, and not a day goes by that I don't wish I could go back." She stared at him in silence for a few seconds, then reluctantly opened the door. They sat at the kitchen table, the distance between them even more intense than before. "You say you destroyed yourself," she began, "but you were the one in control. I was thrown into a false marriage, a game of revenge. There was nothing left in me that you hadn't broken. I didn't know that I could love you, that hatred could mix with it, but I do, and I don't know how to live with this emptiness anymore." She looked at the window, the rain pouring down the glass. "Don't confuse regret with love, Mark." He rested his hands on the table. "If this baby is mine—" "He is," she interrupted without hesitation. "But that doesn't give you the right to pursue me." Mark swallowed. "I don't want to hold you back. I want to be there. I want to make amends, even if I never can." She stood up, her eyes watering. "You want to make amends so badly, but you've never asked me how I felt. You never listened to me. Only now, when you've lost me, have you decided to see me." Mark stood up too. "Then talk. Tell me everything." "I felt dirty, rejected, a chess piece in your plan for revenge. And when I started to feel something real for you, you crushed it as if it were worthless." Silence fell like a sentence. Marta trembled slightly. Mark took a deep breath and on an impulse approached her. "Please, let me be part of this. Of you." But the sound of tires braking sharply on the road interrupted them. Marta turned around, instinctively protecting her belly. 3 men jumped out of a dark car. One of them pointed at her. "It's her. Let's go." Mark ran for the door, but the men were already at the gate. Marta backed away, frightened. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "What's going on?" "I'll explain later." The men invaded the garden. Mark lunged at the first man with a straight punch, but the second was already drawing a gun. The moment the shot was fired, he threw himself in front of Marta. The world seemed to freeze as Mark fell to the ground, blood dripping down his shirt. The white corridor of the hospital seemed to have no end. Marta walked in short steps, the sound of Mark's heart monitor still echoing in her mind. His blood still stained her dress, and the pain in her chest was as real as the gunshot that had hit him. Doctors ran, nurses screamed, and she remained motionless until someone dragged her out of the emergency room. Hours passed, long, drawn-out hours. She couldn't stop shaking. She felt the baby moving in her womb and clutched her belly with her hands as if trying to protect both of them, the one inside her and the one that might be leaving forever. A nurse approached. "He's in a coma. He's stable, but his condition is still serious. Can I see him? Just for a few minutes." When she entered the room, the world seemed to stop. Mark was pale, his eyes closed, his body covered in wires and tubes. Nothing about that man reminded her of the Mark she knew. Not the cold, not the cruel. He seemed vulnerable, human. He approached the bed and took her hand. "You can't leave me now." Her voice came out broken. "Not after everything. Not after saving my life, our life." The tears came, silently. "I hated you, and then I loved you, even without wanting to, even though I tried to fight it every day. But now, I don't know how to live without you." She rested her forehead against his hand. The silence in the room was interrupted only by the rhythmic sound of the heart monitor. Then suddenly she felt it. A gentle squeeze. His hand responded. Marta raised her head, her heart racing. "Mark?" He groaned slightly, his eyes moving under her eyelids. Then he slowly opened them, He looked around, confused, until he met her gaze. "Are you still here?" he murmured, his voice hoarse. She smiled through her tears. "I never left. Not really." Mark tried to speak, but she put her finger over his lips. "Rest. You've done more than enough." Weeks later, with Mark recovering and Marta looking after him as if every gesture was part of the cure, they moved into a small house in the countryside. No luxury, no adornments, just peace. One quiet afternoon, sitting on the porch, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "Are you still afraid you're not good enough?" Mark ran his hand over her growing belly, where the baby was moving. "Every day." She laughed softly. "That's a good sign." He looked at her seriously. "I don't promise perfection, but I promise to fight. For you, for him, for us." Marta held out her hand, entwining her fingers in his. "That's enough." And there, under the golden evening sky, they knew. It wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one, built on the ruins of what was broken, but with strong foundations, made of true love.